The UK economy contracted in July, and this is fueling speculation about a U-turn in interest rates, and the Bank of England could shy away from further interest rate increases. But a lack of willingness to buy due to bad weather, as well as disruptions caused by strikes on the railways, in schools and in the healthcare system, have left their mark on the British economy. According to figures from the ONS, the British economy recorded a surprisingly large contraction of 0.5% in July. The unpleasant news put pressure on the central bank not to raise the interest rate further this month as it did recently. Conservative Finance Minister or Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt drew a comparison with the continent's struggling economies and invoked many reasons to be confident about the future. More than 80% of Britain's GDP depends on the well-being of service providers. This sector, like the construction industry, shrank by 0.5%, and the manufacturing industry even shrank by 0.7%. The third quarter therefore begins significantly weaker than the second quarter ended. However, growth between April and June was only 0.2%, affected by the coronation holiday in May. Of course, the statistics for a complicated economy should always be viewed with caution. It was only at the beginning of the month that it became clear that the island had come through the severe COVID downturn caused by the COVID pandemic in 20 and 21 much better. According to the ONS Statistics Office, instead of around 6 months later, as previously assumed, Great Britain had already reached the gross domestic product of the beginning of the 2020 in late 2021. The next interest rate decision from the Bank of England is due this week, and while experts expect a further increase of 25 basis points to 5.5%, Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey indicated in the House of Commons last week that his policy of tightening the screws would be weakened with 14 recent increases. We are much closer to the optimal interest rate mark than before the parliamentary holidays. In June, the Responsible Monetary Committee under Bailey's leadership raised the key interest rate by 50 basis points. According to the Money Facts website, a mortgage fixed for 2 years, the British are used to frequent changes in their financial products and currently has an average interest rate of 6.66%. And this represents a small relief compared to August, when new mortgages were only available at an average interest rate of 6.85%, the highest in the last 15 years. Nevertheless, more and more house and apartment owners are falling behind on their payments. This put a total of £16.9 billion worth of mortgages at risk in the second quarter. That's an increase of 28.8% on the previous year. Inflation still remains at a high 6.8%, and this means that the Brexit island is performing significantly worse in terms of inflation than the similarly sized economies in the Eurozone, which contributes to the skepticism of the financial markets. Anyone who currently buys British 10-year bonds will be rewarded with an interest rate of 4.42%, just slightly less than Italy's promissory notes. Lending money to London is therefore considered significantly riskier than, for example, Berlin or Paris, and new public sector lenders created by the government since Brexit are investing 2/3 less than the UK was receiving from the EU's European Investment Bank. Over more than 4 decades, the EIB backed UK projects ranging from the Channel Tunnel and the Manchester Metrolink to offshore wind farms and upgrading the national grid. The think tank UK in a Changing Europe has compared the EIB's record with the work of new Treasury-backed institutions, including the UK Infrastructure Bank, the UKIB, not to mention UKIP. The EIB invested an average of £6.4 billion in the UK between 2009 and 16 in real terms, peaking at 7.5 in 16, the year of the Brexit referendum. By contrast, the successor institutions created by the government, including the Leeds-based UK Infrastructure Bank, invested £2.4 billion in 22, a third as much as the EIB was spending 6 years earlier. It's not clear that the UK's domestic development banks will be able to fill the hole left by the EIB by the end of the decade. They lack staff and expertise, inhibiting them from scaling up operations quickly. That was said by Stephen Hansecker, who co-authored the report with Peter Jurkovic. Nor have they achieved the coveted AAA credit rating of the EIB or AAA. Consequently, they lend at a higher rate, making it more expensive to lend to public interest projects. The new institutions, which include the Scottish National Investment Bank, the Development Bank of Wales, and the British Business Bank, also appear to be less focused on infrastructure projects than the EIB. Between them, they invested just 17% as much in infrastructure projects in 22 as the EIB did before it began winding down its links with the UK. Labour's Shadow City Minister Tulip Siddiq said, "The Tories' failure to invest in British industry has left growth on the floor and our public services crumbling, with working people paying the price." Labour will unlock billions of pounds of private sector investment through our National Wealth Fund to deliver new gigafactories, clean steel plants and renewable-ready ports across Britain. And the Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson Sarah Olney said, "This damning report highlights yet another broken promise from this Conservative government. We already knew farmers and fishers have suffered from the government's failed trade deals, but now their investment plans are left in tatters too." And UKIP's chief executive, former HSBC boss John Flint, has suggested it will accelerate investment in the coming years, in particular on projects connected to the government's net zero ambitions, although they are going down, aren't they? But he said earlier this month, the financing needs that come directly of the government's net zero strategy are just going to start increasing significantly year after year. But the UK in a Changing Europe report, titled The Investment Gap, argues that the UKIP's growth will be constrained by strict treasury limits on lending imposed to protect taxpayers' money. Public sector lenders, such as the EIB, aim to harness the lower borrowing costs and longer time horizons of governments to back projects that private investors deem too risky. By providing certainty that a project will go ahead, they can then crowd in private funding. But Hansecker argues that the more modest scale of the new institutions means they have so far backed fewer, smaller and lower risk projects. One recent high-profile investment by the UKIP was £24 million in a Cornish lithium mine. The analysis shows that the EIB projects were not evenly spread across the UK. Between 2010 and 2019, the bank invested £858 per capita in Scotland and £773 a head in London, against £180 in Yorkshire and the Humber, for example. Launching the UKIP 2 years ago, Rishi Sunak, then the Chancellor, said it would contribute to the government's levelling up agenda. The think tank suggests there is little evidence of that happening so far, with most UKIP projects either nationwide or covering multiple regions. The research finds the only sector in which the domestically backed banks have matched EU institutions is in lending to small and medium-sized businesses. The British Business Bank, launched by Vince Cable, then the business secretary almost a decade ago, surpassed £1 billion in lending last year, exceeding the maximum lent by the EIB small business arm, the European Investment Fund. But it has changed in the future as well, by the way. But a Treasury spokesperson said the UK Infrastructure Bank was set up with £22 billion financial capacity and is specifically designed to address net zero and levelling up, providing more targeted support than the EIB, and is better aligned with the government's objectives, so doing the government's work. In its first 2 years, the bank has done 20 deals worth over £1.87 billion in digital infrastructure, green transport and clean energy, supporting 5,700 jobs across the country. Yeah, but you know that I do EU videos here as well. The EIB has done a lot while the UK was in the EU, but is doing much more after the crises now. and I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.